Hello, my name is Giacomo Ricaño, and today I'm going to share with you some of my discoveries regarding my English Advanced 5 research project. Well, so the name of my project is Inside the Mind of Former Stray Dogs, where I attempted to explore some ideas around canine psychology, which until recently I think has been a field of study with many unknowns. And I thought it was going to be very interesting. Well, it was actually very interesting to comprehend more thoroughly the mental processes of these beings that are so loved for us as a humankind. And well, in order to proceed with my research project, I had to formulate some research questions, which are if stray dogs can or not develop mental illnesses. And if so, how similar or different are they to those in human beings? And how do they manifest disease, which are the tangible consequences on its behavior, their behavior, the way they relate with other animals, other dogs, and with humans. So the first step in my research was to figure out more about what are exactly the mental illnesses that dogs are susceptible to develop, and how do they differ from those in humans. So at the beginning, I found myself with two different kinds of scientific postures. On the first hand, those who thought that mental illnesses, not only in dogs but also in animals in general, are not precisely illnesses, but instead what we perceive as such is something that is not physical. On the other hand, we have those who actually affirm that these type of problems actually are something physical. And with physical, we refer to something that is a neurological affection that affects the way that these beings interact with the world that surrounds them. Okay, so in the first place, what's postulated by those who refute the existence of mental illnesses in both dogs and animals in general, as I said, is that it is not that they suffer from mental problems, but that it is about how the environment in which they live makes them feel bad, and that triggers certain type of behaviors and emotional responses that are circumstantial, let's say, and that doesn't necessarily mean uh, that there exists a physical harm. I, within within the ideas of the other of the counterpart, which postulate that uh, that the mental illness in animals is a physical thing, we can find very interesting arguments which cover fields such as psychology, genetics and evolution, and pharmacology even. For example, there is a genetic study uh, that explores the evolution of a family of genes that are called DLG genes, in which it was discovered that mutations in some copies of these genes are linked to the presence of psychological disorders in both animals and humans. Also, it suggested that DLG genes actually originated in the simplest of animals, basically telling us that intelligence and psychological disorders actually began in the earliest stages of animals' evolution. This makes a lot of sense, um, also because it is known that many of the therapies and drugs that are being developed to treat human mental disorders are being tested on animals, meaning that maybe we're not that different from them in that sense. I think that this new conception could have significant moral repercussions in the sense that we will realize that animals are actually beings who think, feel, and suffer, contrary to what many have long thought. Okay, so other thing that I found during my research is that there exists something that is called canine PTSD or CPTSD, which is a type of post-traumatic stress disorder that has been tested in dogs, particularly in military dogs, although this can also occur in dogs that have been impacted by any type of traumatic events, such as abandonment, loss of a loved one, abuse, or natural disaster. There have been some studies in this regard. For example, after the earthquake in Fukushima in 2011, a group of scientists led an experiment in which they analyzed the urinary cortisol levels of two groups of dogs, a group of control and a group with dogs that have been affected directly from the disaster. They found that the second group showed more extreme stress after 10 weeks, had lower levels of trainability and attachment to others, and were more fearful of strange humans and dogs, displayed aggressive behaviors and obsessive behaviors, among other symptoms, which in fact are quite similar to those presented in humans that suffer from these same illnesses, drawing a clear connection between PTSD and CPTSD in this sense. On the other hand, another study that was conducted in 2008 discovered that stray dogs, which frequently experience life-threatening situations, let's say, um, find more difficult to understand certain types of human behaviors that are associated with referential meaning and cooperative intent than domestic dogs. So in order to have more practical basis in which to test the historical framework, I conducted a survey in which 39 owners of former street dogs participated. Nextly, I will share with you some of the questions and answers that I found the most relevant for this purpose. So, well, first, I thought that it would be useful to know how long ago did the respondents adopt their dogs in order to see how is that prolonged coexistence between the dogs and their owners has changed the nature of their interactions. So in question 6 and question 10, I asked them to provide some examples of behaviors that they observed in their dogs during the first months of adoption, and that had represented a difficulty for them to incorporate them into their daily lives. I got too many responses, but I tried to summarize them into main 7 ideas, which are adapting to domestic life, behavioral problems, aggressiveness, fear, learning problems, their deteriorated physical health, and also a number of the respondents answered that they didn't have any difficulties when incorporating their dogs into their lives. Question number 7, I asked the respondents if they have ever regretted having adopted their dogs, and the vast majority of them said that no. In question 8, I asked them to say how often do their dogs display aggressive behaviors when taking them out for a walk. And in question 9, I asked them what are their dogs' behavior like when interacting with other people. And honestly, I was very surprised, particularly with the results of these last 2 questions, because let's remember that these dogs were directly raised from the streets where they probably experienced abuses and life-threatening situations. So it was very interesting to see that the majority of the respondents affirm that their dogs don't have much problems with other people, talking about interactions, and that they behave well on the streets. They don't display aggressive behaviors. I think there is a clear relation here with the fact that the majority of the respondents said that they had adopted their dogs many years ago, which possibly means that the dogs have been able to recover their social skills in a way. In question 11, I asked them if they thought that dogs can develop mental illnesses, and surprisingly, the great majority of them, probably, I think out of 39 responses, 37 of them answered that they think at least that there is a possibility that dogs can develop mental illnesses, which manifests that people is in this way is very empathetic with with dogs when talking about the way they think, the way they feel, the way they perceive the world. Okay, so although emotional trauma has not been widely studied in dogs, as I said at the beginning, there are some techniques that have been shown to be effective in treating specific emotional and psychological problems. In this way, general treatment usually consists on what is called uh, desensitization and counter conditioning. First, the sensitization is about exposing the animal um, to like in a safe environment to a low level of the fear stimulus so that the animal learns that the presence of the stimulus is not followed by an unpleasant consequence. And counter conditioning, on the other hand, is a positive reward technique that basically changes the meaning of something bad to something positive through the use of some type of prize. These techniques, though, must be used carefully and patiently, since not all the dogs will respond at the same pace, nor in the same way. So, yeah, each dog has its own triggers, so it's important to take this into account. Um, it's important to identify them in order to provide them with an adequate care. To end, I only have to say that it was really, really interesting to know more about this topic. I am personally a direct witness of a case like those that I analyzed in this project. My dear Max, um, we raised from the streets approximately 2 years ago, and that nowadays is just my best companion, my shadow, and my guardian angel. I performed this project because I believe that broadening our notion of the mental and emotional functioning of dogs could exhort us in a way to attribute them the individuality that they deserve. Um, as we realize that maybe they are not that different from us uh, when it comes to facing adversity, and even more stripped from all weapons. Thank you very much for your attention.